I'm here.
Fantastic. Hey there, from where are you joining us?
Okay, so here it is. I'm in California and it is 2:10 a.m. So if I start to get spacey, that's because it's really early in the morning here. But
Oh
I'll
wow. Yeah, thank you so much for taking this sacrifice. And I'm
oh
also sorry
no.
for having you last, but of course not least in the panelist list. But yeah, now
Yeah.
even more the opportunity for you to speak about your work as an author. Do you want to tell us a bit more, or also already
Yes.
present a book that you would like to talk about?
Yes. So I actually wanted to give a little bit of background about myself,
Mhm.
because it explains a lot of where my stories, because I'm a fiction writer primarily, come from. So I was born in Cebu, Philippines, and it's a small sock-shaped island in the middle of the archipelago, to those who are not familiar with Cebu. And so this was a while ago, Julian, 19, yeah, whatever. But it was a very interesting place for a child. And my mother came from a political family. There were a lot of stories in that family, a lot of stories in the small town of Cebu where I grew up in. Some of the stories that I heard from my mother about her relatives included a great grandmother who probably had a liaison with a Spanish admiral, another great grandmother who used to hoard paper money in her pillow and it was accidentally burned. And my favorite relative, though, was this great grandmother who I guess they got married at 13 in the olden days. This was back in the 18 something, 1850. In any case, she got married very early, had 16 children, most of them died. She was widowed at the age of 39. She inherited the newspaper business of her husband,
Oh.
a printing press, and she carried on with it. One of her sons became a Philippine senator, my grandfather. Another son became a Catholic archbishop, and another son became a Philippine congressman. And I used to hear stories about this formidable woman. She was referred to as the matriarch who ruled. And she just sort of stayed with me forever, even though I did not meet her. And I will talk to her a little bit more later on
Mhm.
about the book that I later on wrote, inspired by her. The other thing about this little place where I grew up in was that people were interesting. I mean, there was a woman whom it was just a story, but she was called a witch. And we were just terrified of her. Apparently, at night, she would turn into this big sigbin. We called it sigbin, but it's like a dog kind of creature that would
Mhm.
attack people. And there was another woman who supposedly had horns, and I wrote the story about women with horns. So there's a lot going on in there, and there were my folks who used to also talk a lot, and their friends who used to talk a lot about World War II. My father had, and his family, I was not yet born, had to go to Mindanao and all the horrible things that happened. And I guess I must have been an eavesdropper because I actually kind of remembered many of those stories and used a lot of them in my first novel, When the Rainbow Goddess Wept.
Mhm.
So I mention all of these because in some form or other, the stories affected my three novels are all set in not Cebu. I call it Ubek. It's Cebu backwards.
Mhm.
Um, it's a lot like Cebu. Many of my stories, I have four short story collections, also are set in Ubek, even though I also have stories set in Manila, in the United States, in Spain, in other places. But this particular place had some kind of magic, I guess, to me. And So I did want to share that. So even now, even though we live in California, I maintain a residence in Cebu and I visit it regularly. It is still very dear to me.
Amazing.
So
And
go ahead.
Please.
Well,
I was so interested by the story of your grandmother, so I'm excited to hear how that maybe
yes.
finds its way to your literature.
Yes. So I did want to talk about my third novel, and it's The Newspaper Widow. And so actually this photo is of my mother, but the Newspaper Widow novel was inspired by this great grandmother who was widowed at the age of 39 and had to carry on, her husband's newspaper business. So in my novel, of course, my Lola Remedios has been changed and she is no longer that person. She has now become Ines Maceda in my book. And instead of having 16 children, Ines Maceda has one son. And it happens, and this is set in 1909 in this mythical place I have created, Ubec, which is really like Cebu in the Philippines. And this is an interesting time in the Philippines because in 1909, the Spaniards had just lost to the Americans and were kind of driven out of the country in some sense. And the Americans were starting imperialism, and they were now in the Philippines. And this period is what we call the American period in the Philippines. So this is the setting of my novel. What happens, how the story kicks off, is that there is a murdered, the body of a murdered priest is discovered in a creek. And as it turns out, the son, the only son of our widow, Inez, is picked up as a suspect and is jailed. And Inez at this time was just newly married, grieving, and she's trying to make heads and tails out of this newspaper business that she ended up with. And now she has to do something to save her son. She has a friend, a French seamstress, and together they decide that they must find the murderer, the real murderer, in order to free the son. And so the story kicks off. The story is, I would like to think that there are elements in it that are similar to Alexander McCall Smith's #1 Ladies Detective Agency. And that maybe my Ines Maceda may have qualities that Precious Ramotse has. There is, the novel is character driven. It's a gentle novel. There's no blood and gore and sex in there. And maybe you call it cozy mystery. I am not sure exactly what category it is. But it's mostly about character revelation and about friendship and relationships, even while these two women carry on with solving the crime. Book reviewers have said that the characters are compelling, that it reveals a lot about Philippine history, culture, and the society of the time. And another reviewer has said that the plot is layered and unique. It was a finalist, the book was a finalist for the 37th National Book Award. It was shortlisted for the Cirilo Bautista Prize. And actually this book and some other books of mine have been subjects for academic studies, academic papers, which kind of is gratifying to me. Ned Parfan forgot to mention that my publisher is the University of Santo Tomas Publishing House, and that Ned and I work closely with this, and he's a great, very patient guy, because I can be just impossible. Thank you, Ned. And I am also very excited to mention in relation to this novel that I just heard from my newly acquired literary agent, Senja Pozar, that we have an offer from Serbia, and hoping for a couple more other possibilities. And so I'm really very excited. And here's Ned holding up some of my other books. They have just reissued Magdalena, which is another novel of mine, and they reissued The Newspaper Widow. So thank you, Ned.
Fantastic,
Because
Cecilia. This sounds amazing. And then your books will certainly also be in Frankfurt. Will you also be in Frankfurt in person?
I will be in Frankfurt. So I'm looking
Amazing.
forward to it. And
Because we are already approaching, we still have some time